Shalom again, brethren. I'm sharing another lesson study with you, and the name of this lesson study is entitled The Assembling of Ourselves Together. Now, today's date is the first day of the week. It is also the 16th day of the third month of YAHUAH's calendar. On the pagans' calendar, it is the second day of the 7th month of 2019, the pagans' calendar. It is important that this information is shared and understood from the point of view of YAHUAH's calendar and clock, because it will help us to get our minds in tune with understanding when YAHUAH's appointed times are approaching. We cannot be so focused on the heathen's calendar, keeping their appointed times, knowing their appointed times, and not know the appointed times of YAHUAH. We need to separate ourselves from the appointed times of the heathen's calendar and return to YAHUAH's calendar. That said, I will take you into the lesson study, which begins in Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23 verse 1 reads, And YAHUAH spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, Concerning the feast of YAHUAH, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Shabbat of rest and holy convocation. Ye shall do no work therein. It is the Shabbat of YAHUAH in all your dwellings. So here in Leviticus chapter 23 verse 2, we see that YAHUAH announces to Moses that they are to proclaim the holy convocations. The holy convocations, he then goes on to list them later in the chapter. Now we need to recognize what is said about these holy convocations here in verse 2. He says, Concerning the feast of YAHUAH, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations. So the command is, look, concerning the feast, concerning my feast, you shall proclaim them to be holy convocations. Even these are my feast. Verse 3, he says, 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Shabbat of rest and holy convocation. So the 7th day Shabbat is the first holy convocation that YAHUAH made known to Moses that is to be kept. When we read in verse 4, it says, These are the feast of YAHUAH, even holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their seasons. So we are to proclaim. The word proclaim means to announce. It also means to guard. It also means to observe. So it is evident that we have to be monitoring something that lets us see, that helps us to identify when these feasts are. Now the reason why I have brought Leviticus chapter 23 into play with the lesson study is because we see that there's a gathering, there's an assembling that is required of us upon these holy convocations, these feasts. It is totally disrespectful to Yahuwah when we call ourselves his set apart and we are not able to pinpoint his appointed times, but we are able to pinpoint the appointed times of world religious systems, of world financial systems, and of the world looting and festival systems. Yes, I said looting and reveling. It is utterly disrespectful. In Zephaniah chapter 2, we read, "Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired, before the decree bring forth, before the day pass as the chaff, before the fierce anger of Yahuwah come upon you." Before the day of Yahuwah's anger come upon you. He says, "Seek ye Yahuwah, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of Yahuwah's anger." The day of Yahuwah's anger, the day of Yahuwah's wrath, is a day of darkness. It is not one of his appointed times. It is not one of his feast days. It is not one of the days that he has commanded us to proclaim as holy convocations. It is not one of the days that he expects us to assemble. This is why we can have confidence in knowing that when we are assembling, when we are gathering ourselves together upon Yahuwah's holy convocations, his feast days, we can be confident that when we are doing this sincerely and faithfully, our confidence is that no harm will come to us, because these holy convocations, they're not attached, they're not a part of the day of Yahuwah's fierce anger. Just like Noah, when he prophesied that there would be a flood, and Yahuwah commanded him to build the ark for his preservation and his family's preservation and the preservation of the animals, it is so that we will also be preserved in keeping Yahuwah's holy convocations, his feast, in assembling ourselves together in these times that are appointed for us to proclaim. Brethren, it is clear that we're living in the last days of the present world's system, the present world's history, with the evil that is now proclaimed to be good and the good that is now proclaimed to be evil. We need to return, brethren, to gathering ourselves together, not as the so-called churches or circa of the world is doing, but as the way that the apostles and the faith-filled followers of YAHUAH through Yahushua would have done during the time of the lives of the apostles. It is great that technology can provide us with the ability to gather on social media platforms. But the time is fast approaching when we will not be able to gather like this. So it begs us to start to gather together at homes of our brethren, where we can have fellowship, where we can have studies, and of course, where we can convocate on the holy convocations. We are to be separate. We are to be apart, which means we are not to be mingling with the world's religious systems and their appointed times, to follow them, to come together with them. Great examples are left for us as how we can come together. One of those examples is found in Acts chapter 2, verse 42 to verse 47. Acts chapter 2, verse 41. Then they that gladly received his word were baptized, and the same day there were added unto them about 3,000 souls. And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread, and in prayers. And the fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done by the apostles. And all that believed were together, and had all things common, and sold their possessions and goods, and parted them to all men as every man had need. And they, continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, praising Elohim, and having favor with all the people. And YAHUAH added to the assembly daily such as should be saved. So here we see an example that existed then, where the faithful were coming together in the temple and from house to house, or from home to home. The temple, the physical temple that was built, that structure, is destroyed. So the temple that's present today, it's you and it's me. Know ye not that ye are the temple of the living Elohim? Hence, because we are the temple of the living Elohim, we can gather together from house to house, from home to home, to continue to fellowship, to continue keeping the holy convocations, the feast days that we are to proclaim. My brethren, when we read in Acts chapter 5 verse 42, it says, and daily in the temple and in every house they cease not to teach and preach Yahushua HaMashiach. What is holding us back from doing this? Let it not be that we are dragging our feet to come together. Let it not be that we are still caught up in the world's religious systems and following on to the detriment of this world religious systems. Let it not be the case, brethren. When we read in 1 Timothy chapter 3 verse 15, Paul says, "But if I tarry long, that thou mayest know how thou oughtest to behave thyself in the house of Elohim, which is the assembly of the living Elohim, the pillar and ground of truth." My dear brethren, do you see this? Do you understand it? This clearly lets us know that our assembling is called the household, the house of Yahuwah. What more do we need to understand when it comes to assembling ourselves together? When we read in Matthew chapter 12, verse 46 to verse 50, it reads, "While he yet talked to the people," this is Yahushua speaking to the people, "his mother and his brethren stood without, desiring to speak with him. Then one said unto him, Behold, thy mother and thy brethren stand without, desiring to speak with thee. But he answered and said unto him that told him, Who is my mother? And who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hand toward his disciples, and said, Behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother." Brothers and sisters, we need to understand that what the world's religious systems are presenting, it is not what Yahuwah has presented. There's much whoredom, there's much pimping, there's much adultery, there's much fornication, there's much idolatry, there's gross evil that is going on in the world religious system. I don't care if it's Roman Catholic, if it's Adventism, I don't care if it's Pentecostal, I don't care if it is Anglican or Methodist. These systems, these religious systems, these faith systems, they are not founded upon Scripture. And because they're not founded upon Scripture, they are not for you and I, the set apart, to be a part of. They are not our brothers. They are not our sisters. They are not our mother. They are not our father. This is why Paul would have said, Can two walk together except they be agreed? While the world says that Friday sundown to Saturday sundown is Yahuwah's Sabbath, the Scripture totally disagrees with that. While the world says that we can consume unclean foods, the Scripture again is totally against that. How can you and I gather together with the world's religious systems, knowing that they are contrary to Yahuwah's laws, statutes, judgments, and commandments? When we read again about the assemblies, the household assemblies of faith in Yahushua, here in Acts chapter 4, verse 32 to 34, it says, "And the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and of one soul. Neither said any of them that aught of the things which he possessed was his own, but they had all things common. And with great power gave the apostles witness of the resurrection of Yahushua HaMashiach, and great grace was upon them all. Neither was there any among them that lacked, for as many as were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the prices of the things that were sold." Brethren, they did this because they recognized the time that they were living in, and they understood what was required of them. Presently, the time that we're living in begs us to recognize what's going on. It begs us to come together, to assemble together. Not as the world assembles on Sundays and on Fridays and on Wednesdays and on Saturdays, etc., but as Yahuwah has commanded in Leviticus chapter 23. There are some very practical benefits that we gain from assembling together, house to house or home to home. Home assemblies provide a comfortable environment that fosters close spiritual relationships with the faithful. More is shared in these small environments. For instance, the needs of others are quickly seen and recognized. The household and home assemblies, they have more focused studies, fellowship, and worship. There's more openness, hence encouraging better communication and learning. There's much more encouragement and accountability. Leadership is also cultivated within these assemblies. It does not mean that we cannot have one great assembly or one great place of assembling, but because of the laws that are being passed and the way the world's religious and political systems are becoming one, we need to understand where we have to stand in regard to this ongoing and unfolding situation that the world is eventually going to try to push on every human being. Brethren, let us not forget the assembling of ourselves together. The world is assembling themselves under the banner of unrighteousness, of corruption, of evil. We are not a part of the world's systems, whether it's the world's financial system, whether it's the world's religious system, or the world's festival systems. We are not a part of them. And because we are not a part of them, we need to take heed to ourselves wherever we are in this world and start to assemble ourselves together. In particular, on Yahuwah's holy convocations, his feast days. This is the lesson study. I hope that the information that is presented is clear, that it is edifying, and that we do take it to heart, seeing that the night is far spent and the day is at hand. Again, brethren, let us begin to assemble ourselves together. Shalom.